Great. The first part of the API is complete. Now we need to implement a client application to access it. Right now, the only way we can communicate with the API is with Postman. In this video, I'll set up and implement a simple Angular web client to access the API and store and retrieve data. It won't do a whole lot, but we'll add features as we continue with the course. Like with .NET, there is a tool that will scaffold Angular apps for us, and I'll download that before going on. First, installing the Angular tooling requires Node.js. There are many ways to get Node.js, and it depends on the platform you're using. For any platform, you can go to nodejs.org and download the official installer. On Windows, I recommend using the Chocolatey Package Manager. On macOS, I recommend a tool called NVM for Node Version Manager so that you can download multiple versions of Node and switch between them as you need to. And for Linux, just use the package manager for your distribution. With Node.js installed, in Visual Studio, inside of the terminal, I'll run node and then the long option --version just to ensure that it's working. Now the version that you're using doesn't exactly have to match mine, but it should be close. So here I'm running 8.11.2, so something in the 8.11 version should be fine. Next, I'm going to use npm, which is the Node Package Manager, to install the Angular CLI, which is the Angular tooling. So to do this, I'll invoke npm, which is installed with Node.js, and then I for install, and -g for global, so that I can access the CLI from anywhere on the machine instead of installing it to a specific project. And then finally the name of the package, which is @angular/CLI. Now this will take a few seconds to download and install, but afterwards you will have access to the ng command in the terminal. I'll run ng version to make sure it works. Now I'll head into the Conference Bureau folder. I've been working in the server folder, but now I want to add the Angular client into a new folder at the same level. So cd // to move up to the parent. And now I'll run the ng tool and scaffold a new Angular application with the new command. I'll name the application Conference Bureau Client, and then I'll use the --directory option to place it in a new folder called Client. This will also take a few seconds to download all of the dependencies. Don't worry about this warning that you see here. This is because I don't have Git configured on my demo machine, but that's okay. The ng tool also downloads the local development server, and while at first this might sound like a problem, it's actually a good thing. Since we are creating an API, we don't want any client application to have to live on the same server, and thus having a separate development server for the API and client will make sure that we don't get dependent upon such a situation. So to start the Angular development server, just run the command ng-serve from within the client folder. So I'll change to the client folder and then run ng-serve. The application will build and then start the server on port 4200. This means that to run the API server at the same time, I'll have to open a new terminal and run it on port 5000. Now I'm going to open up a browser and go to localhost 4200. I can see the default Angular application. And while this is not a course on Angular specifically, we will need to learn something about the structure of an Angular application. So now I need to open up the entire Conference Bureau. Folder in Visual Studio Code. So I'll go back to Visual Studio Code. I'll go up here to File, Close Folder, and now what I'll do is I will open up the File Explorer, click Open Folder, and now I'll go up one level, select my Conference Bureau folder, and open it. Visual Studio Code will ask me if I want to add the build and debug assets to this folder. Since this is not a .NET project, I'm not going to do that. So I'll tell it, don't ask again. While this is not a course on Angular specifically, we will need to learn something about the structure of an Angular application. Most of what we will be dealing with is inside of the source app directory. Angular apps are composed of multiple pieces such as components, modules, and services. And we're going to be working mostly with components at first. In the app folder, we see a home component that was generated by the ng tool. It has an HTML file for the user interface, a TS file for the application logic, a CSS file for styling, and a spec file which is used for testing. For now, we'll be working with the HTML and TS files. Looking inside of the app.component.html file, it's all just standard HTML with the exception of title and curly braces. Title is a TypeScript variable, and when inside of the double curly braces, the value of the variable is evaluated and displayed. Actually, you can put any valid TypeScript code into curly braces. But where does the title come from? The variable itself is from the logic stored in app.component.ts. This file declares a class, which is a component. Notice that the component directive specifies the template URL as the HTML file we just saw, and the style URL as the style sheet generated by the ng tool. Then there's this selector. The selector is like a tag name. When the tag with app-root is used in the application, it will display the template with styles from the component. Inside the class is a single variable title, initialized to Conference Barrel Client. The title is rendered in an h1 element in the component HTML, and looking back at the browser, Conference Barrel Client is displayed at the top in large text. So that's how the component is wired up. But where is the app-root tag? There's a single index.html file in the source folder. Inside, there's an app-root tag. When Angular sees it, the app component will be loaded, the app.component.html file displayed, and the title variable loaded from the component class app.component.ts. And that's how an Angular app works, more or less. I'm going to stop here and actually implement the access to the API in the next video. Thanks for watching.